Only 5 miles. See you on the map.
You think of a heart as beating, of being active, being stimulated, and of also being a stimulus in itself, of being a catalyst.
The need for a public space, I suppose, is always going to be, yes, but what are we going to curate to be there? What are we going to programme to be there?
When you think about public spaces, it's often quite easy to think about the big, amazing events that can happen there. But actually it's the small routine stuff that's equally as important, people just going about their daily life.
Stalls and markets or Christmas events through to protests or demonstrations. The great thing about public squares is the diversity of activities that can happen within the city can use, they can adopt, it's there, so for their own use.
For me, one of the most interesting aspects of architecture is the way in which you almost create a kind of container where human activity happens. If you think of every kind of event in a person's life, you'll always think of an event as taking place somewhere. Place is always influenced by the built environment. So architecture is kind of the container for the lives of so many of us. And I think the ability as an architect to influence those spaces, to enhance the lives that people are living in by any small way, is something that makes me feel positive.
I'm excited to see that really that I'm going to be making history with everybody. I've watched the university grow from nothing up to where it is now. And I think it's generations that are coming that are going to see all this. But I'm here at the beginning and watching it being done.
Public space that has buildings around it that don't interact with it in any way is, in almost all instances, going to be unsuccessful as a public space. You may get people cutting across it or using it just for their daily travel. In terms of activating a space, you need functions that are going to make people want to slow down and spend some time in that space.
Uninspiring, blank, concrete space with just a couple of bench seats. People aren't going to want to come and sit and have their lunch there.
Sometimes you go in a public square and you'll feel exposed walking through it. And other spaces, the design allows or facilitates you to pause and reflect and stop and look at your surroundings. Designing spaces that allow lots of different types of activities, lots of different use, and people to engage them in different ways, I think is really important.
When you're designing a public space, there's always a attitude of if you build it, they will come, which isn't always the case. That's obviously a very passive way to look at it. It can be successful, it's not always successful, but for us it's really important to actually make sure that you're doing things that really activate that space.
It's the longevity of something within a space, or an aspect within a space. And if you keep coming back to it at different points in your life, I think that creates that sense of ownership and pride a little bit.
When you deliver a scheme, you kind of envisage how it's going to be used. You think, well, this is where people are going to meet, this is where people are going to have lunch. You kind of have a perceived vision of how that space is going to be used.
It's about creating innovative and playful and engaging experiences.
It's really difficult to get a public space to be operational as you intend, because people sometimes tend to stay to the peripheries. As human beings, we don't like to look centre stage. We want to have an idea about what's going on, so we'll normally walk around them rather than through them.
I think the boundary definition is often, in terms of perception, is what will inform people of whether a space is public and accessible or perhaps feels private and you can't enter. So for example, a wall or a fence defines an area as being something that's exclusive, whereas kind of a big open space that has no borders, more often than not, will feel much more inclusive.
It's important not just for me to feel that a space is mine, but for the public generally to feel that it is theirs. We need to get away from this feeling that I'm on somebody else's land. We need to feel more like, yeah, this is mine as well.
I think public art has got a really important role to play in public spaces. It generates different conversations. It's kind of something outside of the norm. It's something that has been either sculpted or placed there with intention.
Pattern, it's so universal that people connect it to so many different cultures, and no matter what background or what religion or where you come from, you connect to it.
The artwork doesn't exist unless it's got people as part of it. The artwork, the public space, it all becomes one thing.
It creates a sense of belonging, having that introduction of art and connecting people to art who wouldn't normally go to museums. The more beautiful you make a space, the more kind of ownership people will have with that space, and the more ownership people have, the more longevity the space will have.
Ownership isn't necessarily something that happens on day one.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You can't open a new public space and suddenly expect everybody to feel ownership of that space. It builds and it grows and it strengthens over time. I think it's to do with memory and recognition and people actually building a kind of long-term relationship with the space.
The relationship with the world is really guided by our memories of our past experiences. It's interesting when you think about how that relates to spaces in the city.
The way that the space is designed, the way that it makes you feel, whether it's by the extent of planting, the use of quality materials, the appropriate scale, can prevent spaces from feeling intimidating, and actually it can make them welcoming, and it can make people feel relaxed and sociable.
In any public space there needs to be beauty. If there's beauty, then the morale of anyone who passes by or uses a space is lifted.
So the idea is that the square kind of bleeds out in all directions. It bleeds into the buildings, it bleeds into the surrounding highway scheme, and it bleeds south into the city. The square has very much been seen as the heart of that. It's the heart of the campus, which also happens to be on the doorstep between the campus and the university. And the intention is that it will strengthen the links between the institution and the wider public. And its location in relation to the city and the campus, it will definitely be a place where there'll be pedestrian traffic moving through it.
If I wasn't involved in this, I would see this change as being a massively positive thing for the city. You're taking out a horrible traffic-filled roundabout. You were discouraging traffic from that area and certainly slowing it down and making it a safer place for pedestrians and cyclists.
The removal of the kind of roundabout that may or may not have served its function, for us to now have this kind of gateway into the university and the gateway into thought and thinking is exciting. In more recent times, the us and them mentality is maybe emerged from the kind of travelling student population, the ones that go home in the summer and don't come back until the term time.
I don't want the university to think it's them and us. No, I want to say it's us. We're all part of it.
Maybe the new square will be perhaps a springboard for that kind of integration with the students and the public.
With Adelphi Square, it will certainly be the beating heart of the campus on a regular day-to-day basis. But we'd also hope that in the longer term, it becomes a key attraction for the city to enter into that space and to share that space with the university.